Hello everyone, welcome back to D2 Stories, an audio fiction podcast bringing you short serialized weekly stories. Today we're going to be getting into Chapter 2 of Mystery on Planet Lamachus. As always, without further ado, let's get into a quick recap and get started. Last time, the crew of the starship Anchorage landed on planet Lamachus, issued with the task of finding out what happened to the research station. The ragtag team quickly discovered the bodies of both researchers and Lamachans, an amphibian-like species native to the planet, strewn about on the surface just outside the station. Mercurius, the ship's hired guard, discovered along with Starlet, the ship's technician, that Captain Rosa had accepted this mission, knowing it was incredibly dangerous, and that they were understaffed for the threat that awaited them. However, before being able to act on it, she returned to the two along with the ship's biologist, Dr. V, and the ship's medic, Roan, after Lamachans could be heard in the distance closing in on them. Before descending into the facility, Rosa took one last look at the Lamachans, who just seemed to stand at the perimeter of their landing. Chapter 2. Entrance and Investigation. Captain Rosa slid down the ladder and into the NAEC research compound. The ladder went down about 20 meters into the cliffside below, where they had landed. The others had already gotten down and gotten to work in assessing the room, lighting it up with flashlights. The room was approximately 10 by 15 meters. Towards the end with the ladder were two desks with computer terminals. Instrumentation of various types were still in the room, almost as if in the process of still being used. Despite there being no sign of anyone in the facility, there was also no sign of any struggle as seen on the surface. Mercurius, seeming to put his feud with the captain aside for the moment, immediately approached the door at the far end of the room. It was cracked open, but still structurally sound based on some knocks from the back side of his knife. He closed it and turned the locking mechanism manually to ensure that it had sealed the room, without the need for power. He looked at Starlet, who just nodded. She started towards one of the terminals. She tried booting one up, but nothing happened. The other gave her the same response. So it's as I thought. The main power is down, and they aren't tied into the auxiliary power, she said. It shouldn't be too much of a pain to wire it into the manhole wires, though. Mercurius grunted. I hate to be so demanding, but could we maybe not do anything that would risk our only known way out of here? There's likely hundreds of those little devils eating the remains of our colleagues in here. Don't say that, Roan said. Come on, he said. We're all thinking it. I don't get why we're stepping on eggshells about this still. Rosa, who silently seemed to be catching her breath, finally spoke. Enough. Guard has a point. About the power, not the Lamachans. We don't know how long aux power has been turned on, and we don't need to do anything to run it out early. Starlet nodded and stepped away from the terminal. Throughout this whole discussion, Dr. V had been investigating various pieces of equipment on the experimentation tables. He perused some of the notes. We may be in luck, he said. Come read this. He turned his flashlight towards a folder and opened it up. It seemed to be notes from an experiment. The papers were titled, Relationship of High Lamachite Concentration in Atmospheric Conditions. The brief read as follows. After comprehensive study of the atmospheric conditions on Lamachus, a conclusion has been reached that the parts per million concentration of Lamachite dust in the air is at least one component of this planet's electrosensitive tremors, known as Arctic thunderclaps. In this scenario, a microatmosphere is created by introducing pressure to a concentration of Lamachite dust, along with a spark for ignition of the tremor, to observe the sustained energy created by artificial thunderclap. Mercurius sighed. Okay, now someone want to put that into English for me? It just means if you put enough Lamachite dust in there and add pressure and a spark, it basically creates the kind of thunderclap that nearly split the Anchorage in two, but on a smaller scale, Starlet said. In theory, we could use it as a kind of battery to power the terminal, Rosa asked. I guess, but the pressure and spark comes from the regular power system, Rowan said. Unless we're willing to use the aux power on it, how will we recreate those conditions? Like this, Dr. V said. He removed his supplemental oxygen supply and disconnected the pumping mechanism that forced the oxygen into his lungs. Rowan's eyes widened, and she quickly checked her scanners. To her surprise, the oxygen levels since coming underground were at safe levels. She showed this to Rosa and the others, and they started to remove their devices to conserve their limited oxygen supplies. Dr. V continued to meddle with the apparatus. He then moved over to what appeared to be a glass box with a pressure gauge and pump attached to it, an electric terminal sticking out from the bottom of the glass. The pressure can likely be lower if there's a higher concentration of the dust. This should be enough to pressurize it, he chuckled. Lamachite, Lamachans. They're so uncreative with the names here. So that's why these spacecrafts keep triggering the thunderclaps, because of the density of Lamachite in the atmosphere, Rosa said. This is incredible. If we got enough of this back to New Alaska, we can get an abundant source of energy. Starlet continued to page the document. Not exactly. This hardly generates any actual net power, she said. The input power required to start the tremor is nearly equal to the power on the output. If anything, this is maybe useful as a stabilizer for some sort of intermittent solar or wind power. But that's about it. And for our purposes, it does next to nothing. While everyone had their flashlights centered on different parts of the document examining it, Mercurius grew bored and started wandering around the room. On the other side of the room, he saw the faintest light coming from a cabinet underneath an experiment station. He slowly walked over towards it, crouched down, and opened the cabinet. His eyes widened as he stumbled backwards and gasped. The others turned their attention towards him, but by then he had clutched something from the cabinet and held it out towards them. "We're not alone in here," he shouted. He held out to the others a glowing egg. It was about the size of a baseball. The dim orange glow that emanated from it seemed to flicker occasionally. He gripped it tightly in his palm. "Guard, put that down now," Rosa said. "Oh, and let it hatch?" he asked. "Wonderful idea, Cap. We can let these little Lamachans pop out and feast on our flesh. There's no better way to go." "It's an egg, Merc," Rowan said. "Are you really that scared of something that small?" "It's bigger than a Martian sand tick," he said. "And last time I checked, those things can burrow into your skin and make your arm necrotic to the point it needs to be amputated. I'm not taking any chances." He squeezed the egg with great strength and it cracked open. Suddenly, an arc of electricity flashed and lit up the room brighter than any of their lights. Mercurius groaned in pain, the heat of the arc lightly burning his skin, despite his flame-resistant clothing. The arc seemed to jump into a grounding rod set in the floor. Everyone felt just the slightest tingling sensation ripple through their bodies before the flash fully dissipated. Mercurius's arm trembled. His sleeve was charred black from the resulting blast. He stretched out his fingers, wincing a bit in pain, but finding he still had full control. "What the hell was that?" Starlet asked. Dr. V shuffled the papers with curiosity, trying to find anything that referenced the high-voltage egg they had just discovered. After perusing everything, he simply shrugged, turning back to the group after being unable to find anything. "If that was truly a Lamacan egg, of which I am somewhat skeptical now," he said, "anything on it will be on the organic side of the complex. If it was some sort of geological phenomenon, then we should be able to find more info on it in the upcoming rooms. Either way, I think we just found our spark." Rose's eyes widened with realization as she put together what Dr. V was implying. "Guard, can you grab another one of those eggs and crack it just slightly so we can pressurize it in one of the chambers?" Rosa asked. "Oh yeah, I'm fine, guys. Thanks for asking," he said. "Screw it. Yeah, I'll crack an egg. So used to frying them, might as well give them a chance to fry me." The team assembled around the computer terminal. Rowan took measurements of Lamachite dust per the experiment procedure parameters. Dr. V prepared the station next to the terminal and hooked his pump up to it. Starlet configured the receptacle so that the voltage differential would power the computer when the artificial thunderclap was created. Mercurius carefully took his knife to another one of the eggs, jumping slightly when a small spark formed on contact. He did just enough to create a small crack to weaken the integrity of the shell, withholding the electric potential. He placed the egg into the container, which was followed by the dust. Dr. V started to pressurize the system, manually pumping in air as the system got tighter. With each pump of air, the dust in the chamber seemed to flit around. The more pressurized the system became, the more slowly the dust began to settle, almost seeming to get suspended in the air due to the low density of Lamachite. After some time, the crack in the egg began to get more pronounced. Before the egg could even get to the point of breaking, though, a spark released and the dust spiraled into the air as aggressive arcs of electricity pounded the egg, creating new fractures as if trying to pierce the egg to get what was inside, just as the thunderclap had done to the Anchorage. In short time, the egg buckled under the pressure from the tank and the high voltage of the energized dust, and it flashed. But unlike before, the arc seemed to get snuffed out by the dust. The once high-intensity flash just now seemed to burn no brighter than a sparkler as the dust vibrated around it like a vortex, absorbing and feeding off the potential it created. The team looked on in awe. Starlet noticed the computer start to boot up. She worked quickly, using her cracker to punch through the password screen and gain access to the research terminal. "What do you want to look at?" she asked. "Email is all right here." Rosa took control of the computer and scrolled through the emails. She read the first one titled Emergency Alert. It was an email to the entire complex, network, and users. It read, "The sirens going off are not a drill. Please report to the Central Command Center immediately." The others looked on over her shoulders intently. She went down to the next email, titled, Imminent Shutdown. The last email sent was from the user, Alessandra, lead meteorological researcher. It read, Dr. Gander, it is with the utmost respect that I ask you to appeal this decision. The strides we have made here on this planet are beyond anything we could have ever hoped for. In the meteorological outpost alone, we are on the cusp of facilitating something in line with the standards of leadership. We are not asking for more resources, just more time. We have the capability to produce several patents that will fulfill the ends of this operation's mission. Please see the attached study outlining our preliminary findings on this new venture. Best, Alessandra Novus. The email I was responding to read as follows. Dear fellow colleagues, it is with a heavy heart that I inform you that NAEC leadership has made the difficult decision to shut down the Lamachus operation. This might be difficult news to hear, as it was for me. I have been with this operation for several years now, and it has been the greatest honor of my career to work with all of you. You are all talented beyond measure. The directive from leadership is to have all loose ends tied up by the end of quarter, and be prepared to board transit back to New Alaska with any items we need. Please be aware that armed security will be arriving and searching down every person and their possessions for any items of Lamachus origin, which will not be permitted to return with us. Best of luck with all future endeavors. Yours truly, Director Omnio Gander. I don't understand. Why were they shuttering this operation before the emergency alert went out? Starlet asked. And how did things quickly go so south? I bet these damn Lamachan eggs started hatching. Search egg in the emails, Mercurius said. Rosa, ignoring his abrasive tone, proceeded to do as he suggested. Search the keyword egg throughout the emails. One of the first results to come up was an email titled, Request for additional Lamachan eggs. I knew it! Mercurius shouted. Shh, Rosa said. She opened the email and immediately scrolled to the first on the thread to read the correspondence chronologically. Alessandra sent the first in the thread, saying, Greetings, Zoo. The Meteorological Department is requesting a few additional Lamachan eggs for our prototype. I understand the restrictions around the development of products involving the eggs right now, but I think we can work to patent this so long as we can get one working. From there, we can hammer out the issues we've been having with the eggs later. Let us know if you can provide us with a few. 3 to 4 should be plenty. Best, Alessandra Novus. Zoo responded within the next hour. Alessandra, we were given strict orders from Gander to cease providing eggs for any projects. Cheers, Zoo. Alessandra fired back. Thanks, Zoo. Again, as stated in my previous email, I understand the restrictions around the eggs, but we have a definitive plan to use them in a prototype. We should be able to get around the issues we have been running into this way. It was my understanding that Director Gander could grant exceptions, and I would like you to bring this to his attention as one of those potential exceptions. Let me know if there's any more info I can provide. Best, Alessandra Novus. Again, Zoo responded shortly. Sorry, Alessandra, I cannot provide eggs to any more projects. I suggest finding another source of energy for your prototype. The email thread went cold after that response. I wonder why they had to stop providing the Lamachan eggs, Rowan said. You people, Mercurius shouted. Search Lamachan attack! Search Lamachan fatality! I know it's in there, but if you need to see it with your own eyes, then so be it. Before Rosa could respond or entertain the request, the sparks in the prototype started to fizzle out as the electric potential in the device seemed to fade. The computer powered off as this happened. Should we load up another egg and more dust and try again? Starlet asked. Rosa shook her head. Not yet, Tech. We have a limited amount of resources here. Plus, the answers we are seeking are likely not in this room. Specialist, would you grab the remaining eggs from this cabinet? Dr. V went in to open the cabinet. There were only 2 of the amber-colored luminescent eggs remaining. He carefully picked them up and carried them. Mercurius looked on with a scowl, holding his scarred arm carefully. Tech, unhook the contraption from the terminal and lift it onto the wheelchair for transport. Guard, take point with me as I unlock the door and we proceed forward. Keep your gun trained on any possible assailants. Everyone be ready to fall back and lock down this room if needed. She stepped forward and started to undo the lock on the door into the next hallway that they had surveyed above ground. Mercurius silently trained his rifle and flashlight on the door, ready to fire at anything he saw. As they opened the door, there was nothing but darkness. Rosa stepped to Mercurius' side, unholstering her own weapon and pointing her light forward as the 2 slowly explored the hallway. The walls were decorated with the photos of Alessandra and her staff, with nameplates underneath each of them that stated their roles. She had a team of 4 dedicated to that department. The others followed closely behind, observing the names of the research team. As was with their office, there was no sign of the kind of damage that was seen at the landing site. They continued walking with a tense silence. Even Mercurius dared not to break it with one of his usual sarcastic remarks. After a few moments, they approached another door like the one they exited. It was manually locked. Rosa and Mercurius seemed to lower their weapons and let out long-held breaths. "What should we be expecting behind here?" he asked. "The Oceanic outpost," Rosa said. "I will open slowly. Keep your gun ready." He nodded. She carefully undid the locking mechanism and began to pry the door open. He kept his gun at the crack and illuminated the room as it was revealed. As it fully opened, he stepped in, pointing the light at every corner of the room. The room was hexagon-shaped, and one wall to the left of theirs had another door just like the one they came through, sealed tight. Across the room was one more, except unsealed. Mercurius quickly darted over to it and locked the door. "Room secured," he said, after waving his light around. The others entered behind and began to examine the new space. It had a similar setup to the one before. One wall lined with computer terminals, the other lined with testing equipment. This time there were a large number of beakers and several tanks full of water. Rowan approached one of them and nearly jolted away as she saw a creature swimming in it. This caught Mercurius' attention, and he marched over towards it, opened the tank, and pulled it out. "Is this one of them?" he asked. The small creature was a crimson-red amphibian, almost like a frog, about the size of his fist. It seemed somewhat amorphous in shape, as it almost slipped through Mercurius' grasp several times by shifting its fluid-like form. He clearly was intentionally gripping it tightly, as if to try and inflict pain, but the being seemed to be unaffected by it. Dr. V came over to observe it. "I don't believe this to be a Lamachus. Look here," he said. He pointed to the round blackberry-shaped eyes of the creature that seemed to bulge out of its head from being squeezed so tightly. "This species has developed a sort of light-sensing neural sensor, like our eyesight. Lamachus have no such receptors." Mercurius noted this and seemed to loosen his grip as the red alien freed itself and leapt back into the tank. It went back to swimming about in the enclosure. Starlet went over to the computers to see if they would boot up, but it was to no avail. Dr. V and Raon paged through some of their research documentation. Rosa opened up a desk drawer to find a pile of books bound with dark leather. She picked the first one up. It was labeled Tamarka Journal, listing a start date as what would only have been a few weeks prior to the loss of communications. Rosa started to read it to herself. Oceanic Lead Research Journal, Lamachus Eve, Universal Day 501 since the opening of the lab, Universal Hour 10 of the day, 3/4 of the Lamachus rotation. Our research has been stagnating lately due to the fervor surrounding the Lamachus eggs. Everyone is turning their projects upside down to have them integrate somehow with these novelties, but our department has little application here. There seems to be no correlation between tides and Lamachus behavior, nothing tying the salinity or concentration of Lamachite of the sea to them. I overheard someone joke to Director Gander that the biggest blunder he ever made was opening the oceanic outpost before the meteorological one. Ridiculous. The other departments are trying to justify taking my assistance as well. I must find some sort of breakthrough. The captain skimmed some entries following this one. Her face expressed curiosity due to the conflicting info this one had to the previous record. The emails between the departments clearly stated that the Lamachus eggs were no longer to be used in research. But in these, it seemed any research without Lamachus eggs was being ignored outright. It did predate the emails she previously read, but only by a few weeks. She continued paging through the journal, thinking that Mercurius, despite his brash nature, may have been right to suggest the eggs were dangerous. She found another entry that drew in her attention. It was dated again with the unconventional logging system. It read, "I was disciplined today for a ludicrous violation. The ecological outpost requested some water for their Lamachus tanks, met with certain specifications of salinity and Lamachite concentration. Knowing well at this point that it made no difference, I sent my remaining assistant above ground to collect some from the nearest stream. Apparently that absent-minded boy sucked up a blood toad in the tank, and it escaped detection. Since there appears to be some minuscule risk of this creature carrying a disease only transmissible to Lamachans, I was berated by the director for this. The amount of regard they have for these vermin is atrocious." She continued reading more entries, identifying any locations where the Lamachans came up. She found another one. "Great news today. I was chatting with a junior researcher in the botany department. We were bonding over the lunacy which has been our interesting and valuable research being sidelined for this Lamachus show. He revealed to me that Lamachans have a sort of reaction to fauna that grows deep within the valleys of this planet. It is like an allergy, but it is incredibly latent and can take time to materialize, and there is no indication of when or where they were exposed to it. Needless to say, I have started sprinkling little bits of it into the water for their tanks, excited to see these gremlins suffer. Another entry of note read, "It finally happened. The Lamachus must be smarter than the people who researched them, because one of them finally bit somebody today as they were trying to force them into a tank. I gotta look at it. Quite nasty." I had heard from a colleague back when I cared to learn anything about these freaks that their teeth are more like chainsaw blades, and it truly shows in the injury. The rest of the Lamachus have been acting agitated. The other researchers are none the wiser, but eventually their precious Lamachus will be tearing them limb from limb as a result of being forced into their experiments. Rosa finished reading. This was the last entry in the journal. There were still a few days prior to the shutdown notice. There remained several pages unwritten. The captain stared at the journal, face growing more bewildered. Starlet seemed to take notice of it. Before she could say anything, though, Rosa quickly tucked the journal into her jacket and pointed towards the door going deeper into the complex. "I think it's best we keep moving," she said. "There will be more evidence of what happened in the administrative chambers." Mercurius gave her a glance of suspicion, noting her sudden increased urgency about moving forward, but saying nothing. He stood in front of the door and waited for her to pry it open as he held his light and gun forward. The team followed behind him as they had another anxious journey down the next corridor. The door ahead was jammed shut. "This doesn't make any sense," Rowan said. "A locked door in an emergency shutdown doesn't make sense to you, medic?" Mercurius asked. "Emergency protocol in an infiltration scenario states that every door should be locked behind every room as you make your way towards the center. But the previous one we had to lock ourselves, as did the first one of the meteorological outpost." "So what?" Mercurius said. "They were panicking. Plus, if you lock the door at one end of the hallway, you effectively keep the area secured as much anyway. We haven't even been locking any ourselves." "It is worth noting," Rosa said. "Respectfully, though, I need both of you focused." Mercurius scowled inconspicuously and raised his gun back up to the door as she prepared to unlock it. The room opened and was immediately illuminated as the team fanned out. The room was another hexagonal one, in the same format as the previous. However, instead of any lab equipment, there were simply 3 computer terminals, filing cabinets, and bookshelves tucked away against the 3 unused walls. Rosa quickly checked to confirm that the other 2 doors were locked. Seeing them both locked, she proceeded towards the one that led deeper into the research station. "I want to get to the control center as soon as possible," she said. Starlet and Dr. V, who had already taken to looking at the books, seemed to look up at her disappointed. "Are you sure?" he asked. "We've learned so much about this planet from the previous rooms. I would think some of the most promising research was in this room for review." "We will have time to look at all of this later. I want to confirm first if I can cut the station to its main fuel source to get everything back online. If not, I want to at least be able to systematically clear each pathway as free of threats, in case we need to post up here." "You're really going to deprive these dorks of the chance to play with these books? So cruel," Mercurius joked. He then whistled, as if shocked by the severity. Suddenly, one of the filing cabinets rattled and popped open. A Lamachus, this obsidian black bipedal creature with a round and smooth oval head and feathery protrusions, burst from the cabinet. It stood only knee-high to most of them, with webbed feet and a slithering and callous-looking tail. It took off on strong legs at high speed. Mercurius, initially taken aback by its entrance, finally trained his gun on it and fired several times. Each shot missed as the creature ran through the hallway the team had emerged from and well out of their sight. Rosa immediately ran over to slam the door shut and seal the mechanical lock to trap the Lamachus outside of the room. The whole team breathed heavily as Mercurius stared, wide-eyed at the door the amphibian-like creature ran through. His eyes seemed to twitch with agitation. Rowan wiped some sweat from her brow and turned her attention to Mercurius. "Not to be a prick, but that's why you're supposed to lock each door after you go through it." Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of Mystery on Planet Lamachus. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast, give it a like on YouTube, or share with someone else you think might also enjoy. You can stay up to date with Mystery on Planet Lamachus by following us on social media. That will be D2 Stories on just about any of the major platforms. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to have you listen again next week.